Hi there, Dr. Carlos Todd here, back with another video on how to fight less, love more. So what is today's topic? What we're talking about is the psychology of emotional triggers, right? Why certain people set you off. So this is an interesting one, at least to me. It's interesting in the sense that we might call it in everyday life pet peeves, right? Things that just really kind of irk you or trigger you. But in some ways, there are people, situations that just tend to trigger us, right? A trigger in some ways is the match. Right? The fire is your response. And so I think it's something to consider, that figuring out what is this thing? Like, what is this trigger and what does it mean, right? The brain tends to operate on patterns. Some sight, some song, some smell, some taste, some touch, right? Something comes into the senses and it takes the brain down a particular path. This is almost an automatic reaction. I grew up in an environment, I grew up in the Caribbean, in Barbados in particular, and there are some fruits. There's a fruit called the tamarind that whenever I think about that fruit, it just causes me to salivate. I have no control over it, and there is a sensation, there's a trigger, and then I respond, right? But the difference here with psychological triggers, what I'm talking about psychological triggers, is the behavior. What happens after that trigger, that sensation happens. And in particular, we're talking about not a fruit, right? But we're talking about the connection between that sense or that sensation and some wound that happened a long time ago in your life. And now, even though the threat is gone, the trigger is still there. And the brain doesn't always tell you that you've been triggered. It just tells you this person is mean, this person is this person is that, and then you react. And so the space between the trigger and the reaction is shrunk, and there's nothing in between. So part of this video is really talking about the in-between. So you have a boss or partner who's dismissive, or a peer is dismissive, their body language is dismissive, and you look around at them and you think to yourself, you make me so upset, right? But you're triggered for some reason. Something is setting you off, right? And so I think it's really, really important to understand that in this sphere, is figuring out what is the original sin, what is the original trigger. And so that's really this idea that a trigger is a hidden gift. Hidden gift? Yeah, because it tells you that there's something historically that has been unhealed, right? That remains in the brain as a wound. And in some ways, now you're kind of caught in this situation where the person is bringing up something, really is creating this feeling within you, but you're not really thinking about the fact that it was my father or mother or my brother or sister or a cousin or family member or somebody from school that is a participant in the original sin. What you're thinking about is, you did this to me. And then there's this overreaction to the situation. So understanding or seeing triggers as a gift helps you to kind of go back and ask questions about where this came from, why it started in the way that it did, and why am I responding in the way that I'm responding. Your job ultimately is to reclaim the response, is to get to a place where even though your partner is triggering you, that person has a responsibility to manage the way how they respond to you, but you also can grow by understanding where this came from. The purpose of understanding where it came from is to create a more regulated response to things. Because when you have an overreaction to a situation because of an unhealed trigger, what happens is that now all of a sudden you move from the issue, what is the original issue, now the other person is talking about your reaction. Right? And now that the reaction becomes a distraction. So you don't want your reaction to be a distraction. And so a more regulated response that may sound something like, this response from you has kind of really created a deep wound for me, or a really kind of deep emotional concern. And there's a part of me that is trying to pull back, but I'm struggling with it, as opposed to, some huge response, right? Just over the top. So the goal is to have a much more regulated response because you understand where the trigger came from. So that is today's video. And if you want to learn more about how to regulate emotions, how to manage anger and conflict in relationships in particular, you can get a copy of my book, Fight Plan. There is a link below to the book. I talk in that book about how you effectively have conflicts in relationships, and I do address this issue that we just talked about here. The book is special in the sense that it goes over the areas that I think are most important in dealing with conflict, right? F standing for framework, thinking about conflict differently, recognize that conflict is a growth opportunity. The I is for introspection, right? Being able to think differently about, to think within or think deeply about how you're responding to conflict. The G is for ground rules, like setting out rules for conflict, what I call a fight plan. The H is for healing and repair, which I just talked about in this video. How do you have healing and repair? And then the T is for transformation. How do you make these changes stick? So often we create these skills and they don't stick. And so that's something that I want you to kind of keep in mind or think about as you go through your own everyday life. So my goal for you is to fight less, love more. I want you to take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.